excuse me, when we want to type text, we start typically using a paragraph element, but you can type it without a paragraph element too. Sometimes we want to modify that text, right? And we modify it using some really simple inline elements. We have B, which is for bold text, EM for emphasized text that appears bold on a page, I, which defines italicized text, small, which is smaller text, literally is just smaller text, strong, which is going to define important text, which is going to appear bolded on the screen, and then we have sub and sup. Sub defines subscript text, and then sup defines superscript text, like if you are squaring X or something along those lines. Whatever kids do in math class these days. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick look here at the text element demo, just so we can go ahead and get an understanding of how these elements work in line. So I'm going to launch it in the browser here. We'll go back and review in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and go to split screen so it makes it a little bit easier for you to see. So here in our code, notice that we've used the M tag in order to emphasize the word some, and then we've used the strong tag in order to bold the word nested elements. So we go back to our web page. Here we see some is italicized, so this page includes some nested elements, right? Because nested elements are super important, so we want to make sure to use the strong element to suggest that. All right. Heading back over to our presentation here. In HTML5, some of the text elements have new functionality. So in HTML4, bold was used to emphasize text by making it bold. Now it just stylistically offsets, so it just appears bold, right? There's no importance in the page. With I, a very similar situation where it's used to make text italic, right? Its functionality in HTML5 is to provide an alternative voice or mood. With strong, we label it with strong importance while making it appear bold, and then with emphasize, we go ahead and we indicate emphatic stress while also making it appear italic. So we have a couple of new elements with strong and M that don't just style the text, but they also provide extra meaning as well. There are some text elements that are no longer used too, and this is actually, we call this deprecation, right? And it's the process of removing elements. So if you ever go to a web page, you navigate and you take a look at the source code, you might see some of these deprecated elements used in code, but that doesn't mean that you should go ahead and use them as well. There are actually some new elements that you can use in order to replace these older deprecated elements. Right, so we want to use the abbreviation element for acronyms. We want to use the object element for applet, right? And then we use CSS or cascading style sheets for a couple of those other elements as well, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. There was a strike-through element which represented deleted text, but now there's a new semantic tag that allows us to go ahead and strike through called delete. One of my favorite ones if I ever need to make sure that people understand I'm trying to delete text. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick transition here. And now that we've talked about text, let's talk about graphics. There isn't a good web page that doesn't have graphics, and graphics can take a lot of different forms. They can take the form of pictures, they can take the form of shapes, crazy robots or zombies or vampires, whatever it happens to be. All right. Images, clearly, super important, and there are two categories that you should be aware of. We've got raster images. There's one there on the left of my dog Stella. I'm just joking, that's not my dog. It's a picture I stole from one of those photo frames at a store. You know what I'm talking about. And then the one on the right there, which is a vector image of a robot. Raster images are made up of these tiny little things called pixels that can be different colors, while vector images are made of lines and curves. Vector images don't distort when they're increased in size, but raster images do. So it becomes a lot harder for us to be able to see a raster image with clarity if we increase it from its natural size. Here's a quick slide that reviews that. A couple of things that are really important to note are that raster images can include the file formats of JPEG, PNG, GIF, and bitmap. They really do pixelate when they're enlarged, so be really careful when you're increasing the size of a raster image. Vector images, of course, they're made with different programs like Photoshop or CorelDRAW, and then they're converted into PNG and GIF formats. They definitely do maintain their quality when they're enlarged, and it's pretty cool to see. It's sort of like if you created a PowerPoint presentation and you made a square, and you can shrink that square and it appears the same way if it's super tiny, just like this, versus if you make it big, just like this, okay? So keep those things in mind. All right, so let's talk about how to embed images into our web pages. We use the image tag. It's just IMG surrounded by our brackets. The image tag does require a source and an alt attribute. The source attribute is going to tell us where the file is located, and then the alt attribute is going to provide us with some alternative text for accessibility. So if somebody can't view the image, they're going to be able to see the alternative text or hear the alternative text if they're using a screen reader. And of course, we've got title as well, which signifies the title of the image. Here, my dog Stella, right, is going to be in our example in just a few moments, but that's the title of our image. There's a quick review of the attributes. One thing that's really important to point out here is that you've got the height and the width elements. Like I said, if you have an image that's really, I guess, really poor pixel density, in other words, if you increase it in size, it becomes really difficult to see and it's proper quality. You can change the size using the height and width attributes. And I typically do this by simply increasing just the height or the width attribute, or rather modifying just one of those attributes. I'll go ahead and show you in just a few moments when we demo with the image tag. There are a couple of other elements that you can use. There's the figure and fig caption elements. They allow you to just sort of block off an image and then go ahead and add a caption to it. That caption can be added to the top or the bottom. So here we've added it on the top. It can easily be swapped down to the bottom, right? It can also be used, the figure element can also be used to specify the type of figure that's being added, and then also to group images. So if I had like 3 different pictures of my dog Stella, then I could go ahead and add them all within the same figure element. I could nest them all within the same figure element, right? So let's actually go ahead and take a quick look at some code here. So I've got a quick image demo for us. If you take a look here, I've got my image tag pointing to a dog.jpg file, right? It's a picture of my dog Stella, once again. And then below, I've got it using the figure element, right? So that same image is nested inside. Notice the difference here between these two elements. The first one, I've given it a height of 400. The second one, I've given it a width of 300. For the first one, the width will automatically adjust so that it maintains the same ratio with 400 pixels. And similarly, the second image tag, where width is 300, the height will automatically adjust in order to maintain the same ratio, okay? The difference here, of course, is that I've got my fig caption element, so I'm gonna add a caption to that image. So let's see what that looks like in a browser. So you got the first one here. Notice it is 400 pixels high. I actually have no idea how long pixels are, so just take my word for it, all right? And the second one, we've got the caption here now, and notice that there's a little bit of padding that's been added outside of the image as well. Who wouldn't want to take this dog for a walk, right? They look about the same size. You'll notice, though, that the second picture is just a little bit bigger because I modified the width instead of the height, right? All right. Let's go ahead and head back to the presentation. So in addition to the image element, we also have canvas and SVG elements. The canvas element creates something that's essentially just a blank container for graphics. It's a new element in HTML5, and you can draw graphics using JavaScript, which is another programming language that we're going to talk about really soon, right? You use the Canvas API, so it makes life a little bit easier for you because you don't have to define all of your own functions. Canvas is used to create 2D games, animations, all sorts of good stuff, all sorts of interactivity for web pages. So note, though, that all of this code that's down below, all of this stuff right here, all that it's going to do is just create a blank container. So there's not going to be anything inside on a web page that uses the canvas element like this, right? Instead, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this code in just a second on screen. But you can see here, we're using JavaScript, which is defined by those script tags, in order to actually draw a small rectangle. We'll talk about what all this code means in a little while, but simply we're just going to go ahead and we're going to fill a rectangle and then go ahead and make it appear beautiful on screen, right? So, and that rectangle should just be 100 by 200 pixels. So let's go take a look at that demo really fast, right? All right, so Canvas Demo, excuse me. It's up on screen here, and it's that same code that we just saw, so I'm just going to go ahead and launch the browser so we can see that and take a look at that. We have our lovely little rectangle. It's 100 pixels high and 200 pixels wide, okay? You can do way cooler things than that with Canvas, but I figured I'd go ahead and keep it basic for now. Don't hold it against me, okay? All right. So one of the things that you need to be aware of, though, is that if you're using an older browser, like say you go visit Grandma, and Grandma's using Internet Explorer 6, right? She hasn't updated her browser for a really long time. Well, the Canvas element might not be available on Grandma's browser. So you're going to have to go ahead and provide content that will display when a Canvas element doesn't render. Right? The content can be an image or text. So here, all that I did is I went ahead and I put in some sample text for the source attribute, just www.example.com, which is a real website, I might add. And I went ahead and I just added a small rectangle JPEG, and then, of course, the alt text, a blue rectangle. I probably should have told them how many pixels it was or how big it was so that they could visualize that, but I didn't, right? So that box right there signifies the additional content that we want to place in if an older browser doesn't render the Canvas element. So next, let's take a look at scalable vector graphics, right? So scalable vector graphics is actually a language for describing 2D graphics, which is created with XML. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's a really, really cool stuff. Not something that we'll get into in this course, but definitely go ahead and give it a quick Bing search, all right? With SVG, you provide drawing instructions with your code to a browser so that it renders the drawing itself. Here we don't use a source attribute in order to point to a file like we do with images. Graphics created using the SVG element, they're scalable, right? So they're those vector graphics. That's what the V stands for. So the quality of the image won't change if it shrinks or is enlarged. I actually had troubles